All right. The most fascinating of all Oswald's relatives, who's not in the picture really, is Paul August Polo Voitier Jr. Um, he was one of Huey Long's bodyguards and most likely one of his assassins because um, there were two guys who were his primary bodyguards. Voitier, who was Marguerite Oswald's uncle. Voitier and one other guy, and then Huey Long gets shot by his own guys. That's how that went down. All right. So here we're just going to breeze through some pictures from Lee's early life. This picture, I don't know what the hell's going on here. I know they were allegedly fishing and Lee's supposed to be holding a fish, but it looks like there's some dude like doing muscle poses behind him. I don't know what's going on there. And I don't know if that's like a weird refractory image on the left, but I don't know what the hell's going on here, but it looks weird. All right. This is believed to be 101 San Saba. Um, this should be about, it's a 38 Plymouth right there, as it says, but this is about 1948 when they move into this address. And this is where one of the first address anomalies happens. The first one actually being not connected to a specific address. This is allegedly a photograph of Oswald at Carnival, but I don't believe it. It doesn't look like him. He looks way too young for the time period. This is alleged to have been when he got back from New York, but I don't really believe that. I don't know who the fuck this is, but this picture was actually caused John Armstrong a lot of trouble. He interviewed a lot of people about this picture, and several people, according to him, actually identified this as Oswald. So make of it what you will. This picture is of the Benbrook Common School. The Benbrook Common School will be the first anomaly that we have in the fall of 1945 when Oswald's supposed to start allegedly kindergarten or first grade. There's some conflicting information on whether it's kindergarten or first grade, but either way. Here we have an undated photograph. Oswald was a cute kid, full head of hair. Not like the guy we seen was arrested on November 22nd. He seemed like a pretty happy kid, you know. As he gets older, you start to see him be a little less happy. This is 46, 47. Where would he have been at that time? 46, 47. He would have been at the Victor Street address. And so here we go in 1950. Here's Lee Oswald in the middle with the big frizzy hair. 1951. He ain't so happy anymore, is he? The realities of his life are starting to sink in. May of 52. Ridgelea West Elementary. This is when he'll graduate from this. This is pretty well documented. His school records up until this point are pretty uncontroversial, with the exception of Benbrook in 45, which we'll get to here momentarily. This is Oswald in 53, 54 in New York. These photographs were provided by John Pick, who's not in on the deception. 1955 at Beauregard in the Civil Air Patrol. Civil Air Patrol photo with David Ferry. All right, the two Marguerite Oswalds. The photograph on the left, that is Marguerite and Lillian. Lillian is her sister. We already talked about her a little bit. They're pretty much the same height, give or take an inch. Lillian's an inch or two shorter, which becomes really important because it debunks the notion that Lillian could have impersonated Marguerite anywhere. Because the Marguerite, and I say that because they were the Marguerite who we know, we'll get to here momentarily. The person we know as Marguerite Oswald, post 59, is a solid 5 to 6 inches shorter than the original Marguerite. This is possibly a picture on the right of Edward John Pick Jr. We don't have any pictures of him. No one knows why or where or any of this stuff. A lot of the people from Oswald's past, you don't see pictures of when it connected to the Warren Commission or any of that stuff. But you'll see a lot of the newer pictures, but a lot of the family and the old stuff, which I think is the most important stuff, you don't really see pictures of any of these people, right? Why? The HSCA took specific pictures of people, and some of them just are not around. So 1935, 37, 42. This woman isn't ugly, right? She's a standard kind of average looking woman, not disgusting by any fucking means. These are all well-documented photos. This photo from 1960 is an anomaly. This photo shouldn't exist. I don't know where this photo comes from, originates from, because the other Marguerite will pop up in 1959. This is Paul Shoestore, 1957. Look, she's fairly tall. She's taller than two of the other women there. She's at least 5'7" to 5'8" tall. And this is the woman that we're told today is Marguerite Oswald. This is not Marguerite Oswald. However, I am of the absolute belief that she is kin to Marguerite Claverie. She is family, 100%. I guarantee that. My inclination is to believe that she is Pearl Claverie. Pearl Claverie Whitaker basically she went nuts And all this information is suppressed with except for a scant reference here and a scant reference there. There's no documentation. This is like this is the documents that I want, right? They're never going to release. They'll never put up the Kennedy heading. But Pearl Claverie went nuts by 1930 something, was in and out of mental institutions, and allegedly died in August of 1963 at the Jackson State Hospital in the East Louisiana State Hospital in Jackson, Louisiana. Now, why is that hospital so important? I'm not even going to explain it to you people, because you should already understand the importance of the Jackson Hospital in reference to the Kennedy story. But I'll tell you this much. I am also convinced that the shenanigans that surround Kerry Thornley, David Ferry, Clay Shaw, going down to Clinton to do the voter registration incident, which was all connected to Reeves Morgan, the representative who wanted Oswald allegedly approached to get a reference to get a job at the East Louisiana State University. This is all the same time, allegedly. This is all happening right after Pearl allegedly dies in the institution. But there's no records on her. There's no death certificate. There's no nothing. All we have is chatter. These are the documents that I fucking want. You think you're getting this in this Donald Trump document dump? Fuck you, my man. We're never going to get any of it. Okay? The deception went so deep, we're never going to get any of it. This is not the same fucking woman. This is clearly two different women here. One of them 6 to 7 inches shorter and much heavier and fatter. The other woman was slender. Again, clearly not the same woman. So throughout the presentation, I will refer to the woman on the left as the false Marguerite and the woman on the right as Marguerite Oswald. This, again, a real photograph of Marguerite Oswald. This is where I get really disappointed in John Armstrong. John Armstrong, since I didn't mention it, is the progenitor of the Harvey and Lee to Oswald theory. Unfortunately, while his thesis was correct, he botched so much shit, it's unbelievable. And I'm also of the mind that he intentionally sat on documents that he didn't reference in his book, Harvey and Lee. And this is a photograph that'll prove that. This is supposed to be the real Marguerite Oswald, and it is the real Marguerite Oswald. I can definitely tell you that. But it's allegedly at 126 Exchange Place. And we'll talk more about 126 Exchange Place coming up. But that is kind of like a huge problem for the, official story people and the people that weren't two Oswald people, because the time period really from September 1953 all the way through July of 1956 is just a shit show if you're trying to corroborate where people are living. All right. Robert Oswald's first wife was a woman named Margaret Emma Keating. They were married from 1920 to 1932. I'm going to point something out really quickly. You see, the woman here, she has these like eyebrows that go at like a 45-degree angle in this photograph. And John Armstrong got really stuck on this, stupidly. All right. So when you go back up to the picture of, where is it? I'll go back to the picture of Oswald's aunt, and I'll show you that the picture that he thought was the fake Marguerite. Here we go. See, she has these like 45-degree angled eyebrows, right? And so when John Armstrong saw the picture of Margaret Keating with the 45-degree slanted eyebrows, he's like, oh, that's her. And he stuck with that till he fucking died. He stuck with that till he died. He was too proud to admit that he was wrong. And I know he found out he was wrong because he's not stupid and he couldn't have not figured out that this fucking picture was not taken at 126 Exchange Place. All right. Sorry. I get a little fucking hot when I see researchers doing shady shit, even ones I fucking respect. All right. So here we go. Margaret Emma Keating, born 28th of April 1892, New Orleans. It's kind of weird because the woman on the right's her mother, and that's Cecilia Keating. And Cecilia Keating looks like a dead ringer for the false Oswald, the false Marguerite Oswald. But I don't know. I'm still grasping at straws when it comes to my identification of her, and I don't have a single fucking picture of Pearl Claverie to clarify anything. But Margaret Keating's life is crazy, and there's some weird shit that goes on, and you're going to see all about that here. So this is really odd. So despite not having been married to Robert Oswald for some 20-something fucking years, during the 1956-56 directory in New Orleans, Margaret Keating, who was at one time Margaret Oswald, suddenly appears in the directory as Margaret Oswald. What does that mean? What the hell? What happened there? And this is in 55-56. Crucial years in regards to the obfuscation of Oswald post the New York period. The New York period, we're going to get to all this stuff. Post New York period, there is a fucking jumble of where Oswald lived, where he went to school, witnesses who knew him, did he have a job, where was Robert Oswald, all this stuff. It's a huge mess. And for some reason, Margaret Keating appears as Margaret Oswald during those years in the directory. There's some shit going on here. There's lots of smoke, but I can't find the fire. Here you go. Listed clearly Margaret Oswald. So you got two Oswalds listed, Margaret and Marguerite, right? And so this also tripped up Armstrong. Armstrong believed this was the proof that this person was the false Marguerite. But he couldn't see past the nose on his own goddamn face. And he was wrong. But what it tells me is, and I don't have much of the testimony of Lillian Moret in this presentation, but if you listen to my podcast, I just did like 6 hours of her testimony, and I still got like 6 hours to go. What you see is that it's clear she's making references to people that don't exist. Like at one point in time, she says that she's trying to get a hold of her sister, Marguerite Oswald, right? She's asked by Mr. Jenner, who's the lawyer for the Warren Commission, asked the question about contacting her. And she says, well, I tried to contact her, but I don't think I did. And I think I contacted her brother. Like she said that in testimony in the Warren Commission. Whose fucking brother? Whose brother are you talking about? It's your brother because you're sisters, right? So why would you call it her brother if it's your brother also? And not to mention the fact that Marguerite Oswald had two brothers and they're both fucking dead. They both died just past World War I-ish from typhus at the ages of 18 and 20. I think they need to be fucking exhumed, honestly, because Marguerite Oswald, it seems like she's the Black Widow. Everywhere she fucking goes, men are dropping dead. Whether her brothers or her husbands, because all of them are fucking dead, right? And that's another thing. There's like references to her possibly being married again. Like people slip up in their testimony and they say things, and then you go to try to figure it out and you're like, wait a minute, that fits absolutely nothing of the known story, right? So if I catch a reference to her saying she's calling Marguerite's brother, which shouldn't exist at all, then I'm like, well, fuck. Who is this woman that has a brother who's connected to the family, right? And then I have to look at the Oswald family relatives to see if there's a family structure that could accommodate somebody having a fucking brother who could be plausible. And of course, is there? Well, yeah, unfortunately there is. But I'm not going to talk about that almost at all today because I don't want to tip my hand on things that are potentially wrong, even though I'm pretty confident I'm right and stuff. I'm narrowing down the field of suspects in this duplicate scheme. And it's been a long and hard, and I've got a lot of help from a good new friend, Diana Thomas, who's been just absolutely stellar in her ability to see past the deception and provide tangible value in the data. It's been fucking great. All right, next one. So when the Warren Commission ends up pulling Marguerite Oswald's credit reports, and how credit reports work back in the day and how they work today are two completely different fucking things. Back in the day, you could like move out of one city, go to another city, and like that city had its own credit reporting agency and you'd be fine, right? But not today. You'll see that some of these, like the national credit system that they use in New Orleans went on to become like Experian or Equifax or one of those, right? So they all end up merging over time. But the FBI couldn't verify a lot of these fucking addresses. They just couldn't at all. And if you're keen and observant and you've been paying attention so far, you should be able to see, you should recognize some of these addresses. All right, so Margaret Keating, this is weird. And this I can't figure out, and I don't understand the relevance of it. But Margaret Keating, and we know this is the same woman. These are her voter registration forms. When she filled out her voter registration forms, over a period of about 20 years, she changed her birth date to make herself 18 years younger. But we know it's the same woman because of the Telemachus address at 120 North Telemachus. The other address related to her is 220 South Telemachus, which was actually her father-in-law, who she had lived with at the time when she got divorced from Robert Oswald, right? But here, this is Margaret Keating. You know, everything is the same on here except for birth dates. She kept changing her birth dates to make herself 18 years younger by 1939. What the fuck she did that for, I don't know. Being that we're on the subject of intelligence and identity transfer operations, I can't help but think that this was part of some identity transfer operation. However, I'll admit that's just me being fucking paranoid. All right, so on Marguerite Oswald's credit report, when they finally got it all sorted out, it turns out that you have multiple people's different addresses on her report. The credit reports of Margaret Keating and Marguerite Claverie Oswald, as well as Robert Oswald, all got mixed up onto the same credit report. That actually happened, and it probably happened because of Robert. And back in the day, like if your name was like, Jane Smith and your husband's name was Tony, you were Mrs. Tony Smith, right? They didn't call you by your actual name; they called you by Mrs. and your husband's name. And I'm sure that caused some of the confusion, which led to some of these addresses being on there. But a couple of these addresses are weird, and this to me reeks of intelligence also. Like 2123 Alvar, that doesn't exist. And 2205 Alvar, they never lived at. So we have 3 Alvar addresses, only one of them is verifiable, all within a year period. Why is that? What does it mean? Nobody has a goddamn clue except for naval intelligence and the CIA. But do you think they're ever going to explain this to us? No. So Robert Oswald Jr. appears to have been in on this scheme. He was involved with both women and lived for a time with the Marguerite Oswald imposter at 4936 Collinwood. All right. Oswald's addresses. There's one missing from here, 1910 Britannia. I apologize for my lackadaisicalness on that, but there's one missing here. It's 1910 Britannia, which no one ever mentions except for Mr. Jenner at the Warren Commission, which is another interesting thing. We have lists of addresses, and then he mentions an address that no one in the world's ever heard of except for him. So it's obvious that the Warren Commission had way more information than they ever released or told us about. So all the red is problematic. The Covington stuff is problematic. The Algiers stuff is super problematic, which I think we'll get to here. I didn't highlight these in red. 2136 Broadway and 227 Atlantic in Algiers. Yeah, those are not in Algiers. We'll talk about that here coming up. Yeah, the FBI couldn't confirm a lot of these residences at all. This is 2109 Alvar. It's in the fucking ghetto now, but back in the day, it was a really nice place. Small New Orleans residences are kind of weird, the way they're shaped. They moved in 38 and then moved out in early 40, although the house wasn't actually sold until 44 or 45. This is a pattern that I found with Marguerite Oswald. So going back to the time of Lee's birth and this Alvar Street address, she was continually an owner of a house, or even at times 2 houses, and at one time 3 houses, while she's still claiming to be broke and living in the hood, right? So there's some sort of weird deception going on there, because if you have 3 different houses that you're renting out to people, number one, who are the tenants? Where are the lease agreements? Where are the neighbors' statements that witness these people living there? We have no evidence except for Dr. Mancuso, who rented the house from 2109 Alvar. He rented the house from Marguerite Oswald, but we don't have another goddamn evidence of any other tenant ever. And Marguerite Oswald allegedly was the landlord for well over 20 plus years. Okay? Hello, FBI. Where the fuck are those records? You know why they don't know why we don't have those records? Because she wasn't a fucking landlord of anything. Her name was used as part of a covert network of real estate that was basically, I don't know if they're safe houses or what they are, but this becomes brutally apparent when we get to 220 Thomas Place, which is in Fort Worth, across from Stripling Junior High School. Because when we get there, what we'll see is that the false Marguerite Oswald lived at that address 3 separate times over a 10-year period with 2 different landlords. Okay? That's an intelligence operation. That is a safe house operation. The woman who's associated with that house most certainly never fucking actually owned that house. I'm convinced now that there is a massive network across the country of homes that are owned by intelligence, that are put into individuals' names, and then these people are shuffled around to different various locations. There's nothing else that makes any sense to me whatsoever. 1242 Congress. Diana believes she never even lived here. I have to look more into that, but I haven't figured that part out yet. But I haven't seen any conflict with 1242 Congress Street, but really that becomes kind of irrelevant. All right, so purchase of 1010 Bartholomew, March 5th, 41. This house will be sold in October of 1941, and we don't know if they lived there that whole time, if they lived there before that. And during this time, this is about the time that Robert Oswald and his brother, John Pick, are put into numerous orphanages, right? So she was such a piece of shit mother. She tried to give her children away as often as she could. Any chance she could get to give them to the orphanage, she would. And there was a time in, God, what year was it? 1946, 47, I believe. She attempted to give all 3 of her children to the orphanage permanently, and they said, fuck you. They rejected her request, and they wouldn't even take them back on a temporary basis after that. So she is a horrible human being, total, complete sociopath. And that's how she got into intelligence, because that's who the fuck they recruit. But really, you wouldn't understand this. This is why this drives me nuts. You will never understand anything about anything unless you understand the intimate nature of people's personalities, the relationships they have with other people, even slight comments, getting a birth date wrong, being a horrible person who wants to get rid of your kids. These are all hints. And these are no one's ever talked about this angle of it, because no one ever digs into the psychology of the people involved. And if you don't dig into the psychology of the people involved in what you're investigating, you're never going to understand a goddamn thing about anything. Fuck. All right. Marguerite and Lee allegedly move into 831 Pauline Street in January 42. I don't know. I don't buy this. I can't buy this. There's this too much contradiction. It's possible because they were only here less than a month, and there's contradictory information on who actually lived here. Allegedly, the Roaches are a couple or an older couple. They allegedly were living here and allowed Marguerite to move in. But then there's other people who say that Marguerite was living there and then the Roaches moved in. But either way, it doesn't matter. They were only at this address maybe 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks tops before Marguerite and Lee move out of here. And then this is what everything has been building to. Sometime after January 42, and honestly, I can't say January 42. I'm going to have to revise this to sometime in 41, which is the only thing that makes sense. Marguerite Oswald will leave Lee Harvey Oswald with her sister Lillian Moret, and she'll disappear for well over 2 years, most likely more than 3 years. The FBI attempted to verify Marguerite Oswald's residential and work history between January 42 and mid-44 without success. This is a quote from John Armstrong. In January 1953, the House on Un-American Activities in New York had a file on Marguerite Oswald. This file contained references to 1941, Nazis, New Jersey, and was eventually discovered in a CIA Office of Security file. The Assassination Records Review Board requested this file, which apparently contained background information related to Marguerite Oswald, but their request was denied. Boom. She worked for Naval Intelligence. She gives herself away. I think I have slides on this coming up. She gives herself away when she states that she was a phone operator for the Navy in Algiers, Louisiana in 1942. Now, what does she actually say there? When she said that she was a phone operator for the Navy in Algiers in 1942, what is she really telling us? She's telling us a lot of things. Because when I did my research into phone operators in the Navy in 1942, what I realized was that you have this entire war effort going on, and all the goddamn military is over in fucking Germany, right? Or wherever the fuck they are trying to oust Hitler. God, biggest waste of energy in history. And so they were short-staffed in America, right? But they had security concerns. So what they do? They created what's called the WAVES program. And the WAVES program was the Women in the Navy program. It was a civilian program that got women into the Navy to do things like operating the phones. Because the WAVES program were the women who operated the phones. You were not in the Navy as a woman in 1942, number one, in America, unless you were in the WAVES program. And what does that mean? There's a whole series of implications that stem from that. From that, you can also automatically, it implies that Marguerite Oswald at some point in time went through the WAVES training program in Iowa, because everyone did, right? So by simply admitting she was a phone operator in Algiers, Louisiana in 1942, she inadvertently admitted she was part of the WAVES program, inadvertently admitted she was part of the training program in Iowa, and then inadvertently admitted that she's completely fucking full of shit and that the addresses that are now subsequently attached to her in Algiers, Louisiana are blatantly false. So John Armstrong realized that the addresses linked to Marguerite Oswald during this time period are not good addresses. And those addresses are 2136 Broadway in New Orleans and 227 Atlantic Avenue. Now, I don't know, anybody who ever spent any time in New York City knows those right off the bat are New York addresses. 2136 Broadway is in New York. 227 Atlantic Avenue is in Staten Island. Okay? That was brutally obvious to me, and it took me about 10 minutes to confirm this. No one at either address knew Marguerite Oswald. Okay? Neither at Broadway or in Algiers at Atlantic Avenue. Okay? People who were interviewed said, no, we've been here forever. This person never lived here. We don't know what you're talking about. The weird thing is, when you connect the 227 Atlantic Avenue address in Algiers 20 years prior, so meaning in the 1940s, around this time, right? Around the time that Oswald is alleged to have lived there, when she told, because they're investigating in 63, and the witnesses say 20 years ago. So 63 back to 43. At the time that Marguerite Oswald is allegedly supposed to be living at 227 Algiers, she's not. But there's another guy named Robert Oswald who went by Bob, who was living there, and he had a daughter named Claire. And Claire ended up dying in 1962. She was only like 45 years old, but she gave an address that a different Oswald family was living at, and not her. And they didn't know her. They didn't know Marguerite Oswald. What the fuck? When you dig into Bob Oswald, who lived in Algiers, guess what? He worked for a shipbuilding company that subcontracted to the Navy. He had a super duper top secret security clearance. This shit isn't coincidence. But the level of obfuscation that we've been engaging in, that the CIA is engaged in over the years, has kept us from understanding what really happened here. At the end of the day, Marguerite Oswald didn't live there. Lillian Moret told the Warren Commission that she took care of Lee from early 42 until the time that Marguerite married Edwin Ekdahl in May of 45. This becomes important because she contradicts herself over when Oswald actually lived with her, which she did. She had no choice but to take Oswald because her sister joined the Navy. That's what happened. All right. This is an application for Robert Oswald at the Bethlehem Orphanage dated January 3rd, 1942. The weird thing is it was approved on December 9th, 1941. Strange, right? But so at this time, you have to think Marguerite Oswald doesn't have any of her children virtually until really, she almost never had custody of her children. Almost never. The only one she really ever had was Lee. And the other ones, she must have had such contempt for that she kept putting him in the orphanage or boarding school. Because you'll see after the years that they're in the orphanage, she will get rid of them to the Chamberlain Hunt Academy in Mississippi for like 3 fucking years, right? She just didn't want anything to do with her children at all. And she tried to give Lee up to the orphanage permanently again, and they said no. And so this time here, in this January 3rd, 42 to December 9th, 41, this whole time period, we're talking about Lillian Moret having the custody of Oswald, when later Oswald will end up being in let me see, I have a document coming up. Yeah, December 26th, 42, Lillian will put Oswald in the orphanage, right? And he'll remain there until, I believe, around June. So what do we have here? We have Marguerite's out of the picture and nobody knows where the hell she's living. We have no information. The Navy has covered this up. And this is what's in the 986-page ONI file on Marguerite Oswald that we're never going to see. Okay. That's what we need to get because it's going to explain all this. It's going to explain where she really was during 41 to 44. It's going to explain how she really met Edwin Ekdahl up in New York and not down in fucking Algiers, Louisiana, how she's working for the fucking Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. Okay. She tries to give the alias, or not the alias, but the alibi that she's working as a phone operator. She tried to walk back her Navy statement and say she worked for the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. Well, guess what? The Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company made fucking glass for nuclear reactors. All right. So what kind of alibi is that? Seriously, like these people are so stupid. Ugh. All right. Application for Lee Oswald, Bethlehem Orphanage Asylum, December 26, 1942. Note the Sherwood Forest address. This is controversial. It shouldn't be controversial. It's proof that Lillian Moret had custody of Oswald, not Marguerite. She was not living in New Orleans at the time. So people say that this is 111 Sherwood Forest Drive. That's not possible. You see there's some little extra ink markings here. To me, it's obvious this was Lillian Moret. She put 119 Sherwood Forest Drive, and it just was misinterpreted by history and then later testified to at the Warren Commission, but it never existed, okay? She never lived at 111 Sherwood Forest Drive. This is another intelligence deception. All right, so Lillian Moret had Lee from between January 28th, 42 and December 26th, 42, and then she surrenders him to the orphanage. That's the actual series of events. The timing of this, like I just said, this all corresponds with her being in New York instead of New Orleans, like she said she was supposed to be. This just goes to show like the dates that we have don't match. The addresses are unverifiable. This is a complete shit show of a story that were given by Marguerite Oswald and where she was living during this time. All right. In the early 1940s, after 2 marriages and 3 children, Marguerite Claverie Oswald began working for the U.S. Navy in Algiers, Louisiana, across the river from New Orleans. Marguerite soon met Edwin Ekdahl, date of birth September 26, 1895, an electrical engineer who graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Ekdahl was working for eBasco Services Company in New York City. One of eBasco's projects was the design of a large electrical generation station in the Soviet Union, which suggests his company worked closely with U.S. intelligence. In 1964, following the assassination of President Kennedy, the FBI requested information from eBasco related to the employment of Mr. Ekdahl. The FBI was told eBasco was unable to provide such information. Okay? eBasco is such an intelligence contractor, they were able to tell the FBI to pound sand, and they did. John Armstrong never explored the unverifiable addresses. If he had, he'd have realized all the evidence points to Marguerite Oswald having been in New York at this time. All right, so the address we're given, 2136 Broadway, a.k.a. 200 West 75th Street, is the Hotel Beacon. Now, I was kind of concerned that she was living there as High-End Hotel, and it was for a long time. But no, I found out she was only alleged to have lived at this address for 3 weeks. Perfect timing to be staying at a hotel. This is exactly where she was before she actually relocated to her final place, which was at 227 Atlantic Avenue, which was a single house in Staten Island. So I don't go too deep into that one. I still need to dig into the records, but it seems fairly on the up and up that she actually just rented that place. But she told everybody that it was in Algiers, but no, it was in fucking New York. Yeah, the Hotel Beacon was a high-end condominium, had a bunch of famous people living there and stuff. Very high-end. She was put up there by someone who had money. And it just so happened that Edwin Ekdahl, who she allegedly met down in while she's working at the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, actually, he was living at 210 North Broadway, 20 minutes north of where she was at the exact same time she was in New York. Coincidence? Give me a fucking break. According to Dewey Ekdahl, Edwin Ekdahl's son, his parents split up in 42, the same year that Marguerite would have been in New York City, right? So this is like, hand in glove. 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is the whole story about Algiers is total garbage. Now, what's going on up there? The Brooklyn Navy Yard was a hotbed of naval intelligence activity in 1942. And I don't think I have a slide on this coming up. Let me take a look. No, I don't have a slide on it coming up, but let me make this point. Lee Harvey Oswald's father had a sister named Hattie Oswald, who would go on to marry a guy named James Coker. She would be Mrs. James Coker. Mr. James Coker and Hattie Oswald were living in New York City, two or three blocks away from the Brooklyn Navy Yard at the exact same time that Marguerite Oswald was in the 1940s. And then after that, they relocate to D.C. because he was like the assistant Secretary of Agriculture or something like that. He was a huge guy, big guy. He had a lot to do with the Agricultural Stock Exchange. I mean, he was a major player in government in the 40s. Coincidence? I don't know. No one ever talks about those people, and I think it definitely needs some further explanation and exploration. All right. Now, what other evidence do we have that Marguerite went to New York and wasn't in Algiers? Well, Hazel Oswald told us so. She said later during the day, telephone call was received from Mrs. Hazel Oswald. She said that Oswald's mother's maiden name was Claverie, that she did not know the name of Mrs. Oswald's first husband, and that her second husband was Lee's father. She said that Lee's father died in August of 39, and Lee was born in October of 39. After the death of the father, the family moved to New York. There you go. There's the evidence, but that's not really what happened, is it? No. Marguerite Oswald took her kids, dumped them in the fucking orphanage, gave her other kid to her sister, and dipped to go join the Navy. That's what happened. And there's not a single researcher on the planet who's ever uncovered this. Because Kennedy researchers are stupid or they work for the CIA. There's no exception. All the good ones are dead. All right. Marguerite Oswald's employment history during 42. She gave she says she worked for Edison's Brothers Stores, which actually owned a couple other stores under different names. It seems as though a lot of the places she worked had other stores that were branched out in different names, which is weird. Seems like another cover. But then again, I'm paranoid, so who knows? But allegedly, the civilian jobs that she was supposed to have during 42 were unverifiable because the company she allegedly worked for, the records were destroyed. Right? Of course. What would you expect? All right. So this is crazy. This is a statement from Marguerite Oswald to the FBI, and it's blatantly false across the board. And we'll go ahead and read this. Miss Marguerite Oswald, 2220 Thomas Place, mother of Lee Harvey Oswald, was contacted to ascertain some addresses of Lee Harvey Oswald during 1944 to 46. Mrs. Oswald furnished the following information. She stated that in 1944, she and her family resided on Bartholomew Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. She said she does not recall the exact address, but that the home was located near the NOLA Theater and on this street. She said that in the latter part of 44 or the early part of 45, exact dates not recalled, she sold the house on Bartholomew Street and moved to 4801 Victor Street in Dallas, Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, that is blatantly false. She provided blatantly false information that completely erased that era from her life. All right, the next verifiable address for Marguerite Oswald is 4801 Victor Street. And this she purchased in sometime in 44. I think they're all living there by 45. They're living there, I think, until 46. And then at some point in time, she will end up getting divorced from Edwin Ekdahl. She does like a sting operation on him and catches him cheating and stuff. But she was a whore. She cheated herself on everybody. When she was with Edward John Peck Jr., she cheated on him with a guy named VJ Knobloch. And then I'm convinced that when she was with Robert Oswald, she fucked his brother Harvey. Guaranteed, she's a whore. All right, so Marguerite Oswald purchased 4801 Victor Street, Dallas, April 28th, 1944. John Pick testified this is correct. That's just verification. Here we go. Marguerite attempts to return John Pick and Robert Oswald to the Bethlehem orphanage. Her attempt is rejected. The letter she sent them referenced the rejection was dated February 45, and it was dated from the Victor Street address. So we still have confirmation of that address at that time. Lee Harvey Oswald's life insurance policy. Oh, God, this is another one. Lee Harvey Oswald's life insurance policy from National Life and Accident Insurance Company was initiated by Marguerite on April 17th, 1945. 4801 Victor was the address on the policy. Okay. You know what happened on April 18th, 1945? Oswald is alleged to have had his surgery on his ear. But we have conflicting information on when Oswald actually had a mastoidectomy behind his left ear. But we have conflicting information on whether it was actually April 18th, 45 or 46. I don't think I covered that too much in here, but it'll all be in my book. But yeah, so the point I'm trying to make here is the day before he went to get surgery on himself, she took out a life insurance policy in case he died. What a cold fucking bitch this was. All right, Marguerite marries Edwin Ekdahl May 7th, 45. And shortly after, he will then move into that address, but then they will sell that place. That's the marriage license. They will sell that place a month later on June 29th, 1945. This here is where we enter into a period of major obfuscation of the record, to the point where it seems as though we have some anomalous activities. And to me, the very first indicators of Oswald being in two places at once, or a distinct lack of records, which I will explain. So despite the sale on June 29th, I have evidence they were still living in that house till September. Okay. September, this is an application to the Chamberlain Hunt Academy in July. All right. So Marguerite and Ekdahl and Lee Oswald will drive John Pick and Robert Oswald to the Chamberlain Hunt Academy on the way to Boston. Okay. This was at the beginning of the school year, which is September 1945. Now, the problems that we run into, and Robert Oswald confirmed this because he started Chamberlain Hunt in 45. The problem that we really run into is that Oswald is supposed to be in Boston as per Robert Oswald. They drove him up there and continued on. They go there. A lawyer for the Warren Commission named John Hart Eli, I believe his name is, or John Eli Hart, I always mix it up. He determined that there was no way that Oswald could have attended the Benbrook Common School, which it says right here, Lee Oswald, Route 5, Box 567, Benbrook, Texas. That's a P.O. box, by the way. Entered the Benbrook Common School, Benbrook, Texas, October 31st, 45. That is in direct contradiction to the statements of Robert Oswald and the findings of John Hart Eli, because he said there was no way Oswald, he concluded, and the Warren Commission's conclusion was that there was no way Oswald could have attended the Benbrook School because he was in Boston. And this is the document here. According to Robert Oswald, Lee and his mother spent 6 months in the fall winter in 45-46 in Boston, Massachusetts. This is while Marguerite is married to Ekdahl. This contradicts the known school records. This is the first known anomaly. And could Oswald actually have been with Aunt Lillian in October? So this is what I'm kind of gathering here. Let me see. Since it says, I'll read this because I'm pretty sure it's here. Robert Oswald testified that the Ekdahls and Lee went to Boston in winter 45, and he adds that they were there for about 6 months. Since we know they were in Benbrook by 2/8/46, I have inferred that they must have gone to Boston in the fall. They were probably there in Boston for Christmas. That was the conclusion of John Eli Hart, or John Hart Eli. I always fucking mix that guy's name up. But that was the final conclusion, that they were up in Boston for Christmas. But yet we have school records of Oswald, October 31st, beginning classes at Benbrook Common School. There's also contradiction on whether it was kindergarten or first grade. We also run into problems in the first couple of years of Oswald's life where he definitely didn't go to school, like just because he was traveling, moving, bouncing around, but yet all of a sudden he's advanced to the next grade, which is weird and doesn't make any fucking sense. So this becomes a big deal because to me, this is the first indication of Oswald being in two places at once. The only alternative is that, and I don't know why they couldn't just ask her and then get the answer. Well, obviously because it wasn't the same Marguerite, right? But they had to find out whether or not Oswald was taken from Boston and went down to go live with Lillian Moret during this time and then started school in Benbrook in Texas. And why is it possible that Lillian Moret was his caretaker at this time? Because despite the fact that Lillian Moret says she never lived anywhere but New Orleans and all the documents show that she always lived in New Orleans, I find one document that shows that she had some sort of social security action taken in Texas, whether it was the issuance of a card or making a claim, I don't know. But I have a document indicating she made a social security claim or something in Texas during this time period. So, what does that mean? It obviously means that Lillian Moret is a liar and she was probably in Texas at some point in time and probably one of several caretakers of this Oswald kid who is, but remember, she's not the woman identified in the pictures as the false Marguerite Oswald, who I believe is most likely Pearl Claverie. So, continuing on. I hope everybody's following so far. Marguerite Oswald indicates her new address as of October 29th, 45 is Granbury Road in Benbrook, Texas, but it's a P.O. box, and we know this because October 29th, she's in Boston, unless, like I just said, Oswald was returned to Lillian, who then took him to Texas. That's the only thing that makes sense, no matter how crazy it is. All right, so John Armstrong's notes indicate Oswald was taken from school on or about April 13th, 1946. He also indicates that Oswald's mastoid operation was February 12th, 46. But as I already said, there's also some indication that April of 45 is when the mastoid operation took place, right? So we have some conflicting information here. I believe the actual mastoid operation took place February 12th, 46, not 45. That just doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't seem to fit the timeline. Like, if you really want to understand any part of history at all, and you just got to put it in a chronology. I swear to God, take the time and make a chronology. Coming up later on, I have a chronology that I put together. It took me about 14 hours, but I'll show you a chronology I put together of Oswald's time in New York City. And once you put together chronologies, all the things that don't make sense will jump out at you and choke you to fucking death. Okay? All right. First address anomaly revolves around 101 San Saba. I wrote this before I realized the problem with the Benbrook School. So really, technically, this is the second anomaly. There's contradictory information on whether they lived there at 101 San Saba in 47 or 48. The reality is the real Marguerite Oswald and her 3 sons lived at the 101 San Saba address. Despite the fact that Marguerite Oswald owned it for a year and a half before living there, they only lived there for 2 months in August and September of 1948, despite the fact she bought the motherfucker in 1947. So here we go. We have another address anomaly of a house. Marguerite Oswald is so goddamn broke, she has to go live in a place by the railroad tracks that keeps them up at night because the train goes by every night, right? While they're living there, she owns a house and supposedly has rental income, but she lives in the ghetto. You see what I'm saying? This is not reality. This is a CIA real estate network that is using people like Marguerite Oswald, and we have another couple names that will attach to this coming up. But there is no possibility that this is organic. Plus we have witnesses who saw Marguerite Oswald living with one son for well over a year at this address, when we can say with certainty, after that time period, the real Marguerite Oswald and all of her sons lived there for 2 months. This is a pattern we'll see. We'll see it clearly at 126 Exchange Place when we have Harvey Oswald and his mother living there, but something happens and forces them to have to get the hell out of town immediately, and they do. They will dip to Fort Worth, where Oswald will go to the Stripling Junior High School, and then what you see is that the real Marguerite and the real Lee will move out of the 1454 St. Mary address, and they will move right into 126 Exchange Place on the backs of the other Oswald and his mother. Wild shit. Wild shit. Okay, Lee completed elementary school at Ridgelea West in Fort Worth, dated May 30th, 52. This is Lee's graduating photo from Ridge West Elementary, or Ridgelea West Elementary. Between summer 48 and summer 1952, Marguerite Oswald will purchase 2 additional properties at 7408 Ewing and 4833 Birchman in Fort Worth. The Birchman address is not on the list of addresses acknowledged by the Warren Commission or HSCA. No Oswald ever lived at the Birchman address. The Ewing address was sold in late 52 when Marguerite Oswald was in New York. So she has properties that are being bought and sold in her name that she never lived at. And there's no record of her ever getting a check, no leases with tenants, none of this shit. This shit goes on for 20 years. It is obvious it's part of an intelligence, covert real estate network. Why? Who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? All right, Oswald in New York, August 52 to January 54. We have, we're about 2 hours in. I'm going to take a break right at 2 hours. Addresses relevant to Oswald while he was in New York, okay? Oh, God, New York has caused me so much headache. I have lost so much sleep over New York trying to figure this thing out. And I think I have the general notion of what happened here in New York. But working out the fine details is hard because when you are looking for things and go to where the thing should be and the thing isn't there, you realize there's a void. There is a void with the vast majority of paperwork surrounding Oswald's time in New York. And Oswald's time in New York, the paperwork we do have, is like a hobbled together compilation of documents from different sources, and it is a mess. And the problem is that if we had everything on New York, it would clearly show Oswald. This is Oswald in two different places like crazy. This entire time in New York, both Oswalds are there, both Marguerites are there, and this causes major conflict in the statements that are made by Marguerite and John Pick and all these people and Robert Oswald later on, who provide information that contradicts the official story on where Oswald and his mother actually were living at certain dates and times. Okay. The main addresses here are 1455 Sheridan. Okay. Allegedly, when Oswald gets to New York, he goes and lives with his half brother, John Pick, and his wife, who's Margaret Furman Pick. And she's weird too. She got some weird stuff going on also. Who the hell knows what's up with her? But that's actually her mother's place, her mother's apartment. And they're living there while her mother's out of town because they're rich. And that's at 325 East 92nd, way down here in Manhattan. Okay. So you see how far John Pick's apartment is from everything else up here in the Bronx, right? And the problem that we'll come across is that John Pick will provide testimony that Oswald, and so will Robert Oswald, that Oswald went to school and lived in Manhattan, which is all down in this area here, right? But no, all the official story stuff has them way up here. So let's see what we can uncover. In August of 52, Lee and Marguerite Oswald move in with John Pick and his wife, Margaret. They live at 325 East 92nd Street, New York City. The official story says they live here around a month before moving to 1455 Sheridan Avenue, apartment F in the Bronx, New York. We do have some conflicting information here because while Margaret's mother is the owner of the place, she wasn't there while the Oswalds were living there. But when she's questioned by the FBI, she tells the FBI that the Oswalds actually lived there for almost a year. So I don't know if she was ill-informed or if he was actually there for a year and John Pick didn't talk about it or what. But all I know is they eventually get kicked out. They don't really get kicked out of John Pick's place, but it's obvious that they move in and they don't really plan on leaving and they never really asked to be there. They just asked to visit. And so they're kind of forced out by Margaret Furman. 1455 Sheridan. This is allegedly the building that they move into next, although I don't agree. This is another anomaly that I believe I know what happened. I believe that what really happened is that when Lee Oswald and his mother Marguerite, the real Lee and the real Marguerite, come and live with John Pick, what happens then when they move out, John Pick will testify that they got an apartment just up the road from him and he went and visited them. And then you'll have Robert Oswald later testify that he went to school at PS 44 in Manhattan, not the PS 44 in the Bronx. And this is all super contradictory. And most people have dismissed all this stuff out of hand as just people being wrong. But no, this was another intelligence deception. Basically, what happened is 1455 Sheridan in the Bronx. All of the Bronx stuff was Harvey Oswald, not Lee Oswald. Lee Oswald's activities in New York are mostly obfuscated until they attempt to merge the records of these two boys, the FBI did, which is exactly what they did when we look at the cumulative school records of New York. This becomes obvious, and I think I have them coming up here. So while Oswald's supposed to be living at Sheridan, it's Harvey Oswald at Sheridan, while Lee Oswald is still living with his brother, John Pick, down in Manhattan. And then they go and get another apartment in Manhattan. But at the same time, Harvey Oswald's up here going to Trinity Lutheran School, living at the Sheridan address. But they're not at the Sheridan address too long. And this is a Lutheran school. And the Lutheran stuff, to me, is another one of these government money laundering operations, thanks to Elon Musk uncovering all this stuff, right? So this Trinity Lutheran School, that's another thing. And special thanks to Diana Thomas, again, for pointing this out to me. All of the places that Oswald and his mother allegedly lived were right up the road from some form of Catholic or Lutheran insane asylum or orphanage. Every address right up the road from an orphanage or an asylum. There's got to be some sort of weird connection there, if not particularly to this, to intelligence in general. But what happens is, and I'm convinced that this Harvey Oswald goes up to New York. He owns the Trinity Lutheran. He's the one who's a truant. He eventually will get out of Trinity Lutheran because he's kicked out of there because he's never going, right? So eventually he will switch over to PS 117. This is the official story. And he will be there until 11653. The problem is he's truant. He almost never goes. So this becomes a problem. This will bring the authorities into the picture through probation officer John Caro, who worked for the state. And then you have a whole bunch of people with these other organizations like Catholic Family Services. They're trying to get Oswald back on the right path. And Oswald is like, okay, you gotta think. This is a young kid, bounced around. He's about 12 years old. He's bounced around from all these different places and schools. He can't form connections with anybody. He's withdrawn. And so he's like, screw it. Like he's kind of given up on life already at the age of 12. Right. And so this is kind of becomes apparent. He never goes to school. And so this causes him problems. This is PS 117. Allegedly, he went there from September 30th, 52 to January 16th of 53. While he's going there, he and him and his mother are living at 825 East 179th Street in the Bronx. Okay, again, this is Harvey Oswald. Lee Oswald and his mother are living down in an undocumented apartment down in Manhattan. And I know this because of the testimony of John Pick, who's not in on this and not a liar. But that information is also hidden. So when they come to giving me the documents, Trump, you can give me some fucking documents? Great. Give me the complete, unadulterated school records of Lee Harvey Oswald, both of them in New York City, including all the contradictions. That's what I want. Never going to get it. All right. So a couple points here. Oswald's allegedly arrested on April 16th, 1953 by policewoman Felicia Schritzer of the Youth Division of the 48th Detective Squad. Now, I went to the education forum, or as I call it, the lack of education forum, and I observed all of the comments by the numbnuts who used that site. And the commentary on Felicia Schritzer and the overall consensus among everybody there was there's no evidence that Felicia Schritzer ever had anything to do with arresting Oswald. But she did, and we know this because how it went down that they discovered this was sometime after the assassination. The records people allowed a bunch of reporters just to go look through the records and look for whatever they could find. And all of the reporters who got to get access to those records, they discovered this information in regards to Felicia Schritzer. Okay. However, this information has been suppressed, intentionally suppressed. And why was it suppressed? Because when you really dig into the story, you'll find that, yes, Oswald was arrested on April 16th, 1953. But he was also arrested and taken on April the 10th of 1953, right? So we have a major contradiction on who arrested Oswald and when. This is Oswald's arrest card that was issued April 16th, 53, and it shows clearly he was arrested at his home the morning of April the 16th. Okay. And it was done by Patrolman Hennig. Shield number 3962. The name of the complainant is James Brennan. James Brennan works for the school board. The school board filed this report. Just to get the name straight, the probation officer will be John Caro. And John Caro, he provides some contradictory information on Oswald as well. So Oswald is convicted on April the 15th. I need you to really pay close attention to this. Oswald is convicted on April the 15th, right here, dated this April the 15th. And it's signed off by, God, I can't remember. I can't read this guy's name. But this is not the normal judge who's associated with the other Oswald. Let me read this. The foregoing petition having been duly filed with this court, and here we go, quote, the persons therein named having appeared, and the court being satisfied upon examination of the petition. Okay, that's the key line here. The person therein named having appeared. Okay, this is dated the 15th, one day before Oswald was arrested at his home in the Bronx on the 16th. Are you feeling me now? Oswald was arrested on the 10th. He was convicted on the 15th. And by the 17th, he's interviewing with Irving Sokolow. Sandwiched in the middle there somewhere is another arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald at his apartment in the Bronx. This is what they're hiding. What does it say here? First admitted 414. Is that what that says? First admitted 414. How is that possible if he wasn't arrested until the 16th? Because there were two of them, and both of them ended up getting arrested. And I'll tell you why. Because Harvey Oswald was being a truant, and after all this, you'll see he dips out in New York. But Harvey Oswald, the one who you know as Lee Harvey Oswald, who was arrested on November 22nd, he's truant and he don't give a fuck. But they're using the same name in their school records, right? They're using the same name in the school records. So the authorities go and they pick up the other Oswald, who was going to school, who we have proof was going to school. And I'll show you that here coming up. Irving Sokolow interviewed Oswald on April 17, 53. His report indicated Oswald had been admitted on the 10th, 6 days before he was allegedly arrested on the 16th, 53. The FBI report also states Oswald was admitted on April 10th. So we have two different sources well, this one's probably referencing the first, so really it's only one source. But and then we have some more information, right? So he took an IQ test and they scored him at 118, whereas we know that Oswald was IQ tested at 103 in Fort Worth. So, like I said, more and more contradictions on all of this stuff. Once we wrap up New York here, we're going to take a break, but I'm going to get through New York first. Lee appeared in court on April 16th, 1953, and was remanded to Youth House until May 7th, 1953. His address was indicated to be 829 East 179th Apartment 3C. It was indicated that he was attending PS 44 in the Bronx. All of this is contradicted by additional information. All right. So, Marguerite Oswald repeatedly provided false information to John Caro and other school board officials. She stated that Lee's father was Robert Lee Harvey and that they were married on July 19th, 1929. Both of those are false. And that they had 3 children together. That's false. Also, why she's making this stuff up? Because she doesn't know the real stuff, because she's taking the place of her sister, most likely. On May 15th, 1953, it was noted that due to the mastoidectomy in 1946, it left Oswald with a loss of hearing in the left ear. This is extremely important, and I think this goes to explain major parts of Oswald's personality growing up, because he was hard of hearing in his left ear after his mastoidectomy. Now, normally, you don't have a problem with a mastoidectomy, but when I did research into this, there is about a 10 to 15% indication that 10 to 15% of people who have mastoidectomy do suffer from some sort of hearing loss. So that is actually supported by the data. And let me see, what does it say here? Loss of hearing. And then on 5/18/13, which is way after the time that Oswald is supposed to have gotten out of Youth House, it says teacher will arrange for an exam at PS 47 for the learning impaired. Okay, PS 47 was a school for the hard of hearing. Now, when we get to John Caro's school records, what we see is that, I'll go ahead and I'll read this, and you tell me if you can detect the problem. School record. Lee's registered at PS number 117, class 710. This is the school he last attended. Upon its arrival from Texas in September, the boy attended a Protestant parochial school. Now, is that the Trinity school? I don't know. Is it? I couldn't make a connection between the name Protestant parochial school and the Trinity school. So it might not be. I don't know. I'll have to double check that again. And then transferred to PS 117. At PS number 47, okay, Oswald's not alleged to have ever gone to PS 47, okay? But it says here, at PS 47, the boy had an attendance of being absent 46 whole days and 2.5 days from October 1st, 52 to January 15th, 1953. The boy is transferred at that time to PS 44, but he refused to attend. Lee has not attended school since that time. All right, PS 47 is a school for the deaf, okay? Why do we have John Caro saying that he went to PS 47 as a school for the deaf? And this would not be Harvey Oswald, because Harvey Oswald, when he was autopsied, he didn't have a scar behind the left ear. Okay? Lee Oswald did. Lee Oswald had a distinct scar. Know who else had a weird scar there? Robert Oswald. Weird, huh? But Lee Oswald, the really Harvey Oswald, had a distinct scar behind his left ear from a mastoidectomy. We don't have the proper school records, because allegedly when he was he was at Trinity School in the Bronx, but he couldn't have been at Trinity School in the Bronx, because he was living in fucking Manhattan with a Manhattan address that John Pick will provide to the Warren Commission, right? This is clear-cut evidence of 2 Oswalds being in 2 different places in Manhattan at the same time in the same school system, and they will both be sent to 2 different youth houses. But as I'm talking here today, it's just starting to fall into place that the school that the real Oswald probably attended was PS 47 in Manhattan, while Harvey Oswald was attending the Lutheran Trinity School up in Bronx, and then the PS 117, right? So this is all starting to fall into place for me, and this will all be sorted out by the time my book comes out. So here we go. It would seem to be well known that Oswald had trouble with hearing. This is in the newspaper, but no Kennedy researcher ever mentions Oswald having a hard time hearing, which would explain his withdrawn personality, why he did bad in school, why he didn't want to have other friends, right? Not because he was a loner communist, but because he was fucking deaf. And how the fuck do you get into the Marines with hard of hearing? Does that get fixed over time? I don't know. You go to a school for deaf kids, but then you can get into the fucking Marines? Really? Do you see how none of this story makes any sense? I might not be giving you a ton of answers here today, but I'm showing you all the goddamn right questions. Troubled with hearing. Mrs. Oswald and Lee, the youngest of her 3 sons, had come to the Bronx from Fort Worth, Texas in September 52. Board of Education records had the youngster had trouble with his hearing. until first apparently a sequel, a mastoid operation in Texas. So there you go. Everyone knew he had a hearing problem way back then. So Marguerite Oswald hired a lawyer named Edgar A. Buttle to represent Lee in court. This is kind of a dead end. I couldn't really find much more than these documents here. But one thing that Edgar Buttle told Marguerite was, you need to get your son and get the hell out of New York immediately. And this was right after May 7th of 1953 when Lee gets out of youth house. And then she meets with the lawyer. He's like, look, they're gonna lock the kid up. And this place, you don't want him locked up here. You need to get the hell out of Dodge. And that's exactly what they did. They got out of Dodge. And I can tell you with certainty, the Oswald that is left in New York post September of 1953 all the way through January 54 is the real Lee Oswald, while Harvey Oswald will end up ditching to North Dakota, which we'll cover here momentarily. All right, so here's a problem. We have this document and it's dated 428. Okay, so Oswald has been at the youth house until May 7th, and he's there from what? We have two different contradicting dates, right? We have April the 10th, we have April the 16th. Those are the two dates that we know that he was sent to youth house, right? So, but the problem here is that we have this one single report that says PS 611, and Lee Oswald, John Armstrong dug this up. And John Armstrong, pisses me off. Armstrong just flubbed information that he didn't have. Okay. If he didn't know, if he had a gap, he just filled it in. And you don't do it unless you need to have, okay, you can't just have one dot here and one dot here and fill in the dots. No, you need to have a string of dots. That's obvious what you need to fill in the middle in order for you to make speculation, okay? He didn't do that at all. He was never a trained investigator or investigator. None of that shit. The motherfucker doesn't know what he's doing. And I give him props for his theory being correct, but as far as